Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey: Plato Wyngard and the Armour of the Gods. Chapters 21 to 22 by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 21. Plato and his men were taken back to where they had earlier addressed the entire tribe. Only now it was to face possible death. The local spectators appeared excited by the coming event. Obviously, it was a rare occasion for them. Knot and tool had been removed to one side, their restraints back on, able only to watch. Plato suspected their hosts didn't want them interfering if things went sour. As for Plato, Luther, and Nat, they had been led into the main arena where they were made to strip off their shirts and await further instructions. The bracing cold caused them all to shiver. Again, Plato suspected that it wouldn't last long once the test began. Arius addressed the audience. "Our uninvited guests have agreed to our terms, and for the first time ever, 3 shall participate," Arius said loudly. This was met with applause. "It is now time to recite the rules of the test. This is a test of trial by combat. 1. Participants shall choose only a single weapon. 2. Once the test has started, it must continue to the end. 3. Anyone trying to flee the combat area will be eliminated immediately," Arius said in a clear, sonorous voice. Plato noted that everyone in the crowd was also recalling the words verbatim with their chieftain. 4. The test is over only when one of the combatants is dead. If clemency is asked for by the victorious warrior, it may only be granted by the tribe's unanimous decree. When Arius finished the last rule, a roar erupted from the crowd. "Are there any last words?" Arius asked. Plato looked towards his teammates. "Has anyone successfully completed the test?" Plato asked. There was a long pause. "No outsider has ever passed the test," Arius said gravely. "Well, there's a first time for everything," Plato growled back. Another roar went up from the tribe. "Bring out the ballot," Arius said. A young boy of about 12 ran out, holding a small wooden box, roughly 30 centimeters square. He handed it to Arius, who in turn held it up to show the tribe. "This box holds the names of everyone in the village old enough to hold the title. Warrior," Arius said to another roar of approval. According to the rules of the test, these 3 men, Arius indicated Plato, Teferi, and Luther, will each step forward and, in turn, draw the name of the warrior whom they will face. Once the combatants are known and are in the arena, the test will begin. More cheering and applause. Arius pointed first to Teferi, who nodded, then stepped forward. Arius held the box up and motioned Teferi to reach in. The bushman did so and pulled out a small piece of paper. "Please read out the name on the paper," Arius asked. Teferi studied the paper. "Delia," Teferi said aloud. There was a cheer from the crowd, and a woman stood up, her fist raised high. Teferi looked dumbstruck. "I cannot fight a woman," Teferi said. The tribe booed his remark. "If you don't fight, then you will die. Having said that, you will more than likely die anyway." "She is a highly skilled warrior," Arius said. The woman, Delia, looked coolly from the grandstand and gave Teferi a wicked smile before making her way down. Teferi moved back to his teammates. Arius then pointed to Luther, who strode out aggressively towards Arius and in turn pulled out a name from the box. "Abrax," Luther said, then flipped the paper to the ground. This time the tribe fell silent. One of the lieutenants stood, the one similar in size to Luther, This time, instead of a sullen look, he too wore a smile of confidence. Luther glared back. Without waiting for Arius, Plato strode out. But when he tried to reach into the box, Arius pulled it away. "I don't know what you're pulling here, but there is no way you're keeping me from participating," Plato growled. "Oh, you're competing. Only I will be your opponent," Arius said. This time the tribe went crazy with applause in response to this announcement by their chieftain. All 6 of the combatants stood within the arena, stripped to the waist, including the female. The 3 tribesmen and the woman were in superb physical shape. Plato was now becoming concerned with how well they would all fare in combat against foes who were so well trained in this particular field of warfare. "Bring out the weapons," Arius announced, almost eagerly. 2 men carried a large table out into the arena, a heavy cloth laid across it. They placed it down and slowly removed the cloth, revealing what was underneath. The table was laden with an assortment of handmade weaponry, ranging from short swords and daggers to axes and spears, a cornucopia of death and destruction. With Arius now a participant, the role of referee and invigilator fell on Panos, an elder from the tribe, a stern-looking man in his late 60s, who, despite his age, still looked rather virile. Panos called out each individual and asked them to pick a weapon. Abrax was the first. Without hesitation, he reached down and grasped the warhammer, a large, brutish instrument, its square head fashioned from solid steel sitting atop a long wooden handle a meter long. Abrax held it high, receiving a cheer from the crowd. They started to chant his name over and over until Panos quieted them with a wave of his hand. Next was Teferi, who gingerly moved forward and inspected the items on the table. After a long debate, he went with a long scimitar that had an exotic design to it. After him, it was Luther, who went with a double-sided axe, pointing the head at Abrax defiantly. Abrax grinned darkly back. The tribe enjoyed the interplay as they cheered wildly. Fourth on the list was Delia, who chose a trident. She spun the weapon deftly around her body, its movement a blur. Plato was next. His choice was based on his own experience, a mid-length sword shaped like a saber, years of fencing being the primary reason for his decision. Finally, Arius strode towards the table. Again, the tribesmen started to chant his name. He too chose quickly. A plain-looking spear held in his hand, easily the longest weapon available, with a long, thick point on the end. Arius carefully removed his necklaces and handed them to Panos. Combatants moved to the outer perimeter of the arena, Panos dictated. Everyone did as they were commanded, forming a large circle facing in. 3 tribesmen and 3 outsiders. The test is over when only one team remains. Outside of the rules that were mentioned earlier, anything goes, Panos stated. He then nodded, and a horn was blown, its sound echoing down through the ranges. Before Plato and his team could even comprehend what was happening, Abrax came rushing at Luther, his warhammer raised high, a battle cry on his lips. He brought it down in a whoosh of air. Luther barely had time to anticipate as he leapt back a pace and parried with his axe, the sound of metal on metal sending out a loud ring. The crowd cheered with delight. As this happened, Delia took advantage of the chaos caused by Abrax. Everyone's attention focused on the giant's attack. She circled behind and attempted to flank Teferi while he was momentarily distracted, his peripheral vision catching the flash of the bronze trident as it sped towards him. Teferi ducked and rolled. Clutching the scimitar tightly towards his body, He came up swinging in a wide arc, the female warrior easily deflecting his counterattack. Plato spun towards the tribal chieftain. Using a lunging method he had been shown countless times, he pressed an attack on his opponent. This time it was Arius who was caught. Surprised by Plato, as he parried with the end of his spear, the wooden pole giving off a dull sound with each blow. The crowd continued to cheer as they watched 3 individual fights take place before their eyes, each person knowing only too well what would happen if they were defeated. Having now recovered from the first attack by Abrax, Luther swung his axe in a barrage of blows, his mind flashing to a similar incident where, during a Viet Cong assault on his company's defensive position, they had almost been overrun. The battle had been brutal and chaotic. The close proximity of the enemy had resulted in vicious hand-to-hand combat. Sharing a pit with a close buddy, Private Michael Bung, who had just received a bayonet to the stomach after shielding Luther from a surprise charge. Luther had picked up an entrenching tool, a foot-long apparatus that had both a shovel and pick attached to a small handle, commonly referred to as an ET. With nothing to lose, Luther had swung the ET like a tomahawk, removing half the enemy's skull in the process. And for most of the night, that's how he had dispatched any and all threats that dared to enter his pit. Now, armed with his axe, he swung for all he was worth. Teferi was not having similar luck. Having managed to survive Delia's flank attack, he had tried to fight back effectively, with poor results. The warrior woman was like a force of nature, her movements swift and fluid. She defended his assaults as if she could read his mind. Her predatory smile never left her face. Teferi now wished he had gone with the dagger, as he'd had a lot more experience with dispatching foes with the smaller weapon. But he had gone with the scimitar as it had looked more formidable. Now, with hindsight, it was too cumbersome in his inexperienced hands. Of the 3, Plato and Arius seemed to be the closest in mastery of the spear. Despite Arius's masterful skill, it was obvious that, having honed his craft on a variety of weapons, it didn't allow one to reign supreme. On the other hand, Plato had spent his days, from the age of 5, fencing in competition, learning a variety of styles, his years of training honed by actual bloody combat, allowing a primitive side to take over. Self-preservation, his #1 goal. "You fight well?" Arius grunted with exertion. "So do you," Plato replied, as he pressed forward, parrying a thrust from the spear and slamming the hilt of the sword into Arius's cheek. "And as much as I'm impressed with you and your team's competence, don't you think this is rather a waste of our time, and possibly lives? To you, maybe, but to us, this is a way of life. Without tradition and a moral code, our lives would be empty," Arius said, as he swung his spear in a downward arc, nicking Plato's forehead and drawing a thin trickle of blood. Plato jumped back and wiped the blood from his head. "Maybe. But what I've learnt from war is that there are usually no winners, only hollow victories. The price of lives lost is something that you can never hope to regain," Plato said, as he swung his blade high, the warrior chieftain ducking its oncoming edge. Luther was continuing with his berserker assault, Abrax only just managing to avoid the axe's deadly edge, when the ex-marine stepped upon a large rock on the ground, the sudden change of inertia causing him to overcompensate and pitch forward. Luther was only just able to roll with the momentum, ending up on his back. Abrax seized the opportunity and brought the war hammer down with all of his considerable strength. Luther barely had time to raise the handle of the axe and halt the blow, the two men straining to see who would be the first to surrender. It was obvious to all watching, as well as to Teferi, that Delia was only toying with him, her abilities with the trident far outstripping his own with the scimitar. Using the trident like a staff, she belted the bushman's body with the blunt end, striking vulnerable areas and nerve clusters. This did nothing to deter the safari agent, until a well-calculated strike penetrated his defense and toppled him to the ground. Spinning the trident up high, Delia repositioned the business end into a killing strike aimed at Teferi's throat. Thinking all was lost, Teferi did the only thing left to him. Grasping a handful of dirt in one hand, he tossed the gritty earth into the oncoming eyes of the warrior woman. The unexpected tactic having the desired result, Delia's first reaction was to cover her eyes against further transgressions. She then used the time to slowly back up, allowing Teferi the opportunity to gain a measure of control from the chaos. Still straining, Abrax had managed to slide the head of his hammer over the handle of Luther's axe handle. With its crook wedged tight, he pulled with all his strength, the sudden shift taking the ex-Marine by surprise as the axe went sailing out of his grip. Still in the standing position, Abrax brought his warhammer up high, preparing to bring it down in a deadly arc. The sudden movement by his friend's aggressor made Plato shift his awareness. "Luther, look out!" Plato screamed a warning. His concern removed the edge he had almost managed to procure from Arius, who used the opportunity to sweep his feet out, Plato falling heavily to the ground. Luther jumped to his feet and grasped Abrax's arms and held on with all his strength. The two pitted tightly together as they wrestled for dominance. "I know all about you, brother," Luther spat. "It's all about brute strength and being number one. But sometimes you have to know when to go with the flow." Using words to confuse and stall, Luther shifted tactics and all of a sudden stopped straining against Abrax and instead whipped his opponent's arms down in a windmill arc and flipped the large man around, his momentum doing all of the work for him. Abrax hit the ground with a mighty thud and a loud expulsion of air from his lungs. Unable to breathe and disorientated, Abrax was unprepared for Luther, who came crashing down on top of his chest with his elbow and then sliding the forearm up under his throat. It was only a matter of seconds before Abrax passed out from lack of oxygen. Not wasting any time, Luther leapt to the aid of Teferi, who had been unable to capitalize on the situation against Delia. With her attention focused on the bushman, she was completely unaware of Luther as he moved swiftly behind the warrior woman and placed her in a chokehold. She immediately dropped the trident and attempted futilely to counter his hold. Within seconds, she too was unconscious. Plato rolled a split second before Arius brought the tip of his spear down, right where Plato's head had been. He was able to do this twice more as he thwarted Arius's killing stroke. But the intensity with which both combatants fought was beginning to wear them down. "You're on your own now," Plato grunted as he continued to roll from Arius's spear. "It makes no difference," Arius replied. He felt a tap on his shoulder. A moment too late, he glanced back as Luther's giant fist connected with the side of his face. The blow only grazed him, but it was enough to make the chieftain reel from the punch, and Plato scrambled to his feet. The remaining tribesman was still on his feet and still armed. "Leave him, he's mine," Plato ordered. Both Teferi and Luther, who had closed in, now backed away. "This is the way it should be," Plato said grimly, and Arius nodded. They sized each other up. Each man moved subtly and changed his stance in response to the other's attack. This went on for several minutes. No move was made as in a game of chess. Both warriors were anticipating the final play that would let one of them clear the board. Arius was the first to move. Like a cobra, he struck with blinding speed, his spear slicing the air in a blur of movement. Plato countered with his sword, his stance side on. He barely moved, only the flicking of a wrist, and he parried the spear and thrust simultaneously with his own offensive strike, the tip of the blade landing under the chin of Arius, pointing directly at the throat, though it went no further. There was a universal gasp from the tribal onlookers as they realized what had just happened. Arius had frozen in place, all too aware that the British soldier had bested his defense. But instead of giving death, he had stopped his assault on the killing stroke. Realizing he was at Plato's mercy, Arius dropped his spear to the ground. Plato, keeping his sword trained on his opponent, looked toward Panos, the referee. "My friends and I have bested your 3 warriors in combat. We have no desire to kill them. I ask for clemency," Plato declared. The referee remained mute, he then surveying the 2 unconscious warriors and his chieftain, who was but moments from death. He then glanced towards the seated audience who looked on in stunned silence, having just witnessed a battle of unprecedented skill and bravery. "What say you all?" Panos asked the crowd. There was a resounding "yes" from the crowd, followed by thunderous applause. Plato let out a long sigh of relief and let his sword fall to the ground with a clatter. Arius straightened up and regarded his victorious foe, a smile slowly forming. Luther joined him and clasped a big hand on Plato's shoulder. "Next time we're forced to do something like this, it's Nat's turn," Luther said, and both men broke into laughter. Chapter 22. That evening, the Lacedaemonian tribe held a feast in honor of Plato and his team's victory. Seating had been arranged around a large fire pit that was roasting several ibex. The tribe's enthusiasm and merriment were almost unparalleled. Wine was passed around freely, but it was due to the heroics of these strange outsiders that had made everyone overjoyed. "These are the craziest bastards I've ever met," Luther muttered. "You certainly got that right," Plato replied. Nat just grunted through a mouthful of steaming meat. "We have a deep appreciation of the warrior," Arius interjected as he passed a goatskin of wine to Luther. "We meant no disrespect. I'm afraid your ideals in our modern world are waning," Plato said. "Your honesty has not offended, and it is a shame the modern world has fallen so far," Arius said, as he took a deep drink from his horn of wine. "It has seemed of late that the world is always on the brink of destruction," Teferi said, and there were nods and murmurs of agreement everywhere. "Arius, how is it that you and your people seem so well-spoken and knowledgeable?" Plato asked tactfully. "My people have always deemed the pursuit of knowledge to be as important as the role of the warrior. And despite our remote location, we travel often to debark to trade and to gather information of the outside. What we have learnt makes us appreciate what we have here," Arius said. "I don't blame you," Plato replied. The festivities continued for several hours, the wine and atmosphere leaving Plato and his team in no doubt that they were welcome. It was nearing the end of the evening when Arius stood up and addressed everyone. Today is a historic day for us. Never has there been a time in our recorded history that outsiders have come and bested us in combat, Arius stated. The tribe stomped their feet in unison. The fact that 3 have done so is a grand day. Plato and his team seemed stunned by the tribe's attitude towards this fact, something not lost on Arius. You think me mad? I can see it in your eyes, Arius said with a smile. Mad? No, it is unusual, though, Plato mused. We believe that through adversity and challenge we become better. No one ever bettered himself through complacency, Arius said. That is an admirable philosophy, Luther said. Thank you. With what we've learnt today, a new generation will be forged. Stronger, tougher, more resilient, Arius said. This was met with more foot-stomping and cheering. But this celebration has 2 more reasons for occurring. And why is that? Plato asked. Despite besting us in combat, we have decided to make you members of our tribe, Arius said. Abrax and Delia stepped forward and presented each member of Plato's party with a medallion attached to a leather thong. The medallion was inscribed with the Greek alphabet letter lambda, the symbol of Sparta. They all appeared speechless as the medallions were placed over their heads. Speaking on behalf of our group, we are honored by this gesture and your generosity, Plato said humbly. What was the 3rd reason for the celebration? Teferi asked. That we will help you with your quest, Arius said with a smile. Tool had happily agreed to remain behind with the tribe, but Arius, Abrax, and Delia had packed and were welcome additions to Plato's party, as they departed at dawn for the final summit. The peak took 3 hours to reach. The journey taxed the breath of Plato and his team, who were not used to the high altitude. As they stepped towards the final plateau, they all sensed the sudden exclusion of noise and wind. It was as if they had entered a bubble that blocked out the rest of the world. They all took up positions, ready for combat. Can you feel that? Plato asked. Arius nodded. I can't explain it. This feels most unnatural, Arius replied. The plateau was oval in shape and roughly 30 meters in diameter. At the entrance stood a large rock, partly covered in moss. On further inspection, Plato could make out a carving, the face of a man. After clearing away some of the moss, he realized it was the depiction of the wind spirit, Boreas. Angry, bearded, and riding a cloud, Boreas was looking at something in the distance and blowing a gale from his lips. They continued to clear the moss from the rock, revealing a depiction of the Simeon mountain ranges, including the peak where they now stood. What is that on his breath? Not asked. They all studied the image. Intertwined with the swirls of cold breath were words in Latin. A principio ad finem, cum Memnonis gladio imponet Spartam, Plato read. And that means? Luther asked. From the beginning to the end, Memnon's sword lies with Sparta, Arius translated. So we walked all this way for nothing, Nat complained. So you have the sword? Luther demanded. That is not, Arius began. Well, where the hell is it? Luther growled. Are you calling Arius a liar? Abrax started. Whoa! Nobody's calling anyone anything, Plato said, attempting to calm the hotheads. I honestly don't understand what the message means, Arius said. I know you don't. There has to be more to the message. Plato's voice trailed off as he stared out across the plateau. What is it? Teferi asked. Plato ignored the question as he walked towards the center of the plateau, counting as he walked. Everyone had fallen silent as they watched the ex-SAS trooper deep in thought. When Plato got to 23, He turned around and walked back to the large rock and slapped it. 24, Plato announced. What is it? Teferi asked again. Is there anything else written on the rock? Plato asked. After several more minutes of searching, Luther called their attention to the top of the rock, previously overlooked because of its height. Plato pulled himself up and smiled at what he saw. Just what I thought, Plato said cryptically. Do you want to fill us in? Nat asked. It's the symbol for alpha, the first letter in the Greek alphabet, Plato said. And that doesn't make it clearer, Nat said, struggling to light a cigarette, coughing and spluttering. Damn high altitude! I think I know where this is headed, Arius suggested. If you will all look around. There are 24 rocks, including this one, on the plateau, Plato said. Everyone did as he asked. There are 24 letters in the Greek alphabet. The riddle says that there is a beginning and an end. That would be Alpha and Omega, the first and last letters. It then says that the sword lies with Sparta, Plato said. And if you look at your medallions, the symbol of Sparta is lambda, Arius said, smiling. So if I'm right, we count the rocks and the 11th rock will be the one we seek, Plato said. It didn't take long. They counted the rocks, going by the nearest to the alpha and using proximity as the key. They uncovered moss to find the correct symbols in the correct sequence. Delia and Nat found the lambda rock. Luther and Abrax used small shovels to dig at its base. After 20 minutes, Abrax's shovel hit something metallic with a dull ring. A further 10 minutes had them dragging a long bronze box from the ground. Teferi and Arius cleaned the grime and muck away, revealing a beautifully engraved case. Designs of heroes and gods covered the top. A large, heavy lock held the lid closed tight. They attempted to smash it open, including shooting it, but all efforts failed. This is ridiculous, Luther said. What the hell is that lock made of? Plato mused, as he readied himself to fire another shot. Wait, Arius said. Everyone regarded the chieftain. From the beginning to the end, I think that we all agree that this is the end, correct? Everyone nodded. Omega, Arius said, and pulled out the leather necklace from under his cloak, revealing the lambda medallion, but also a carved brass symbol of the letter Omega. This has only ever been worn by the chieftain, but no one, including me, has ever wondered or questioned why, until now. Arius took the symbol off and inserted it into the base of the lock. It slid in perfectly. Arius turned it just like a key until he heard a loud, audible click. The lock popped open. They all crouched close to the case as Arius removed the lock and slowly opened the case. There was a collective moan of excitement as the lid was thrown open, revealing Memnon's sword. Just as Toole described the armor, this too was untarnished, sparkling like new. The blade was like shining silver, the guard gold. And the grip was inlaid with gems, set off with a giant green emerald on the pommel that looked like a magnificent alien eye. After a nod and smile from Plato, Arius carefully removed the sword from the case and held it aloft. The sunlight hit the blade, and it shone like fire. It's so light and well-balanced, Arius said as he stood up and cut the air with it. The sword whistled as it moved. May I see it? Plato asked, and Arius handed the sword to Plato. He too swung it back and forth. Amazing. From what I've read, the scrolls suggested the blade was impervious to damage. Plato murmured more to himself than anyone. Then without warning he stepped forward and sliced at the base of the rock. "No! What are you doing?" Arius yelled. Plato ignored the warning as the blade struck the rock, slicing clean through it as if it were warm butter. The blade of the sword came out the other side, and after a brief pause, the upper part of the rock slid from the lower and crashed heavily to the ground. Plato held up the sword. It was completely unmarked. "I'll be damned," Luther whispered. After witnessing the power of the sword, they also uncovered from the case a scabbard of pristine black leather and gold trim, and beneath that, a sheet of parchment. It was written in Latin. Plato read what it said. "Only the purity of 100 can restore Memnon's glory. In the heart of a city is the site of the holy," Plato recited. "Really? More riddles. Can't these assholes just say, 'Do this, go over there, grab this'?" "Ah, man," Luther said with a frown. For the first time that day, Plato burst out laughing. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Plato Wyngard and the Armour of the Gods has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quills books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.